What is going on, everybody? Welcome into Fixing the NFC East. We are whipping through these things. This is our 5th out of 8 in this offseason blueprint series. I really hope you're enjoying this series. Please do hit that like button down below. If you are, make sure you go back and get through the other divisions as well, so you're all up to date on who's coming up, free agency, what I think these teams should do. And let's start in the NFC East. And we're going to start with the Dallas Cowboys, where some headlines were coming up this morning, circling around wide receiver Amari Cooper, potentially on the move. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But the Dallas Cowboys are $21 million over the salary cap, so they do have some work to do. I didn't do the nitty-gritty research as far as how many contracts they've moved around already and stuff, but I don't think it's been that many. I think just with restructures, they could theoretically get back over the cap. But the problem is they have a laundry list of impending free agents as well. So they are probably going to have to make a few sacrifices, some tough decisions here, at least when it comes to letting some of these guys go. So their impending free agents are 2 starting caliber wide receivers, Michael Gallup and Cedric Wilson. Their tight end, Dalton Schultz, who totally broke out in 2021. Their starting left guard, Connor Williams, who has come along nicely, still struggles with some power on the inside, but an all-around good guard. And then on the defensive side of the ball, 2 safeties that they brought in, really 3. I didn't even list Malik Hooker here, but Damontae Kazee, J-Ron Kearse, and Malik Hooker as well. And then linebacker Leighton Vander Esch is up. On the edge, Randy Gregory, who had possibly his best season as a pro last season, and a rotational edge, Dorrance Armstrong, who has kind of developed every year and turned into that kind of ideal third edge where he can defend the run, play physical, buy some time for a guy like Randy Gregory to be more of a pass rush third down specialist and not get lost as a pass rusher in the meantime. So Dorrance Armstrong is no joke of a player. But obviously pretty low on their list of priorities. So again, $21 million over the salary cap. That is almost exactly Amari Cooper's yearly money. And I, again, should have done a little more research here for exactly how much cap space. You know what? Screw it. Let's look at Amari Cooper's contract on the fly here because I'm not lazy. So if they were to trade Amari Cooper, they would actually clear up a decent amount of cap space here. Looks like his cap hit is $22 million, and 16 of that is in salaries. So you would clear up probably over $15 million in cap space. That would be very valuable money to re-sign this long list of guys. And if you don't do that, it's going to be really tough to keep like Michael Gallup and Dalton Schultz. So what's the trade-off there? If it is as simple as we either have Amari Cooper or we have Michael Gallup and Dalton Schultz, I do think that's a tough decision. I think Amari Cooper is awesome, but you have your alpha in CeeDee Lamb at this point in time, and Amari Cooper has kind of taken a back seat. And I tweeted this morning, but Amari Cooper has the physical talent to be the best receiver in the NFL. He's big. He's extremely fast. He has rare quickness and foot speed at his size. You know, his release and his route running ability, it stacks up with someone like Davante Adams or Stephon Diggs at the top of the league. But for whatever reason, Amari Cooper seems to be missing that extra gear. He misses that my ball bitch mentality. Like when the ball's in the air, Amari Cooper wants the ball, but he doesn't need the ball. He has a lot of drop issues. He doesn't have those ball winning mentalities about him. And when you look at Dak Prescott, I've said this countless times, Dak is a quarterback like a Tom Brady, for example, that in a pinch, he loves to trust his wide receivers. It's a blessing and a curse sometimes for Dak, but one thing he is very capable of is under pressure, knowing a good spot to put the ball to a receiver that he trusts, that instead of a 50-50 ball for that receiver, maybe it's a 60-40 ball or a 70-30 ball. And that's not Amari Cooper's game. Amari Cooper is a timing, route running, dominant receiver in that part of the game, but he's not a ball winner. So you could look at this and say he's overpaid here in Dallas. And I think Dallas is kind of on the right mindset there. And they say, well, we'd rather have Michael Gallup, who is a ball winner, is someone that Dak trusts in those situations and would be cheaper than Amari Cooper. And we can have Dalton Schultz, who was Jason Witten. Like, I'm going to probably just piss off every Cowboys fan in the world with this, but I said when the Cowboys drafted Dalton Schultz that he can be a replacement for Jason Witten, who was a third down chain mover and a good run blocker, and really not a whole lot more than that. He just did it consistently for like 15 years, and because he has a star in his helmet, everyone thinks he's a Hall of Famer, but that's exactly what Dalton Schultz has turned into. So you could very easily look at this and say, look, we trade Amari Cooper, we can get maybe a first round pick for him. If not, you could probably get a second for him. You know, his cap hit's pretty big, so who knows? But you can get a valuable pick, which means a good player and a cheap player, and you get Michael Gallup and Dalton Schultz. I think that's a very reasonable trade-off. Now, I think Amari Cooper's awesome. I think he's underutilized in Dallas. I think there's ways where he could come back and you get him more involved in the offense, and he actually is worth $22 million. So I think you could look at it either way there, but I understand the thinking there. So I'm at this point, I think that's very likely that they trade Amari Cooper and then they go and re-sign Michael Gallup and Dalton Schultz, and that's kind of a fair swap in their mind. But beyond that, you still have Cedric Wilson is a free agent. You have Connor Williams is a free agent. On the defense, we mentioned a lot of starters there, or at least rotational players. So they still have a lot of work to do. And I think after the Amari Cooper trade, after those re-signings of Gallup and Schultz, you're still probably pushing about even with the salary cap, depending on what they do with their pushing money into the future and restructuring contracts. There are a couple cuts that I saw that could clear about $9 million. Two players that I think would be expendable in this scenario would be Blake Jarwin, who I think would clear up about $4 or $5 million. Same thing with Anthony Brown at cornerback would clear up another $5+ million. Brown and Jarwin are decent players, but they have better players at those spots. You know, Jarwin, you obviously just re-signed Dalton Schultz. In Anthony Brown's case, decent player, but they have two starting corners in Diggs, obviously, and Jordan Lewis, and I really liked what I saw from Kelvin Joseph, a second-round pick last year, who I think they'd be smart to hope he takes that next step next year. So those could be potentially expendable players. I looked at Zeke's contract. It's still terrible. You can't really get out of it, so they're stuck with Zeke for at least another year, even though he's not even their best running back at this point in time. But yeah, that's pretty much it for Dallas. Honestly, it's picking which of these players you want to re-sign. Now, if you did cut Jarwin, you did cut Anthony Brown, I think that would open the door for them to retain some pretty key, like, smaller pieces for that defense. Someone like Damontae Kazee, you could bring him back. That safety group, after all these losses, is very thin. Now, there's other options, but I think Kazee played well for them. And another guy would be Dorrance Armstrong. I think would be smart to try and keep around for cheap. He's probably worth more to you than he is to other people. You're probably looking at about $2 to $3 million for Dorrance Armstrong. And he's valuable because he kind of opens the door to stay flexible with Micah Parsons a little bit. You have Lawrence is your premium edge. You have some other young players you've invested in that spot. It does to me seem like you're going to lose Randy Gregory unless his suspension history just kind of takes him off of other teams' free agent boards, and I wouldn't rule him out coming back here, Randy Gregory, but I do think he's going to be a little bit too expensive for Dallas. But Dorrance Armstrong does allow you a little bit extra flexibility as far as someone that can start on early downs. Micah Parsons can play a little linebacker, play a little edge. It allows you to keep playing around while you perfect Micah Parsons' role off the edge. And, I think Armstrong can hold his own while you maybe draft someone at edge or prepare in the future to get a different edge. But that's pretty much the Dallas Cowboys outlook right there. Moving money around, maybe trading Amari Cooper. But if you don't trade Amari Cooper, you're probably saying goodbye to at least Michael Gallup or Dalton Schultz. And it's not going to be a terribly exciting offseason for Dallas. They're just a little bit cap strong. I don't think free agency is going to be very much an option for them, unless you're talking about once you get into like June, July, those like veteran minimum deals, which they did find some good veteran minimum contracts last year, to their credit. Guys like Keyz and Keanu Neal. J-Ron Curse, another one of those. So there might be some of those sprinkled in. But for the most part, they're not going to be big spenders in free agency, because I don't think they can be. But then as you look towards the draft, I do think this is a good spot for them to replace Connor Williams at left guard. You also have Tyler Biadasz at center, who's fine, but could potentially be upgraded. So I look at them with the 22nd, 23rd pick. 3 names that really would make a ton of sense for them if they're Kenyon Green out of Texas A&M, Zion Johnson out of Boston College, or even a Tyler Linderbaum could potentially be falling. So I think the chances of one of those 3 being there at 23 would be a great immediate upgrade and plug-in replacement on that interior offensive line. Then I look into the second round. I think this team really needs to beef up either at edge or interior defensive line, where there's a lot of depth in the edge group. So maybe you're looking at Amijah Sanders to replace that speed threat off the edge in Randy Gregory, a Ebiketie out of Penn State, something like that, a Boye Mafe, something in that grouping, or interior defensive line. It's just a group that has never really stepped up for Dallas. They've been so squishy on the interior. So do you get a Devontae Wyatt would probably cost you that first round pick, but in the second round, someone like Travis Jones would be sweet. Just a plug and play run defending defensive tackle, should be around that range in the second round. So that could be a good pick. Or what about a DeMarvin Leal? We talked about kind of Dorrance Armstrong's role here, that flexibility, the hybrid mentality that has been Dan Quinn's like go-to here. DeMarvin Leal could play a little inside on rush downs, play outside on early downs, get creative there with his flexibility paired with Micah Parsons. Their ability on stunts and stuff could be a headache for opposing offenses. So those are just a few names potentially to keep an eye on as good fits for Dallas in the draft. But again, a pretty straightforward offseason, nothing too exciting other than a potential Amari Cooper trade. It's all about moving money around where you can, keeping those key players I talked about, and probably letting anybody I didn't talk about go, because I just don't think you can afford anybody else beyond those top players. Now we have the Philadelphia Eagles, who also have a pretty straightforward offseason. They have $20 million in cap space. They have a few objective needs and not a ton of impending free agents. So their list of free agents is Nate Herbig, who's played at a replacement level guard for them. Both of their starting safeties, Rodney McLeod, Anthony Harris, both solid players, up there in age, but kind of replaceable level types of guys. On the edge, Derek Barnett, former first-round pick that just didn't really work out. They have some players on the edge there. I don't think they're too worried about that loss. And then cornerback Steven Nelson, who played very well as the number 2 corner opposite of Darius Slay. So as far as re-signings here, I would focus on Steven Nelson first. That just seems like if you let him go, you all of a sudden have this glaring hole at corner that you don't want to create. Get him back. He's not going to cost you a ton. I think like 2 years, $16 million for Steven Nelson. Get that done, and you don't have to worry about finding a starter necessarily. You could risk letting him go, test the market, maybe pursue a J.C. Jackson or pursue a Carlton Davis. I would understand that mentality as well, so both of those could be options. But the safer route would be to just keep Steven Nelson, who played very well. You already have Darius Slay there as your number 1. Steven Nelson, your number 2. It's kind of smart team building. As far as the safeties go, those would be the other players I would be talking to here. Just trying to find value there. Rodney McLeod, you want to come back for $4 or $5 mil? Anthony Harris, $4 or $5 mil? That sound good. Let's make a deal. If they're like, no, I need to test the market, I'm worth more than that, then you say, okay, good luck. There's other options. There's a big, deep group of safeties in free agency this year, and they could even upgrade there. So I would talk to both safeties. I think they probably end up re-signing one of those two. If I had to guess, I would say probably Anthony Harris would be my guess, and they let McLeod go, but I don't know. And then you head into free agency with a decent amount of cap space, probably around $15 million in cap space. and go to work. You've got 4 remaining needs left, in my opinion: wide receiver, linebacker, edge, and safety. Now, the nice thing for the Eagles is they have 3 first-round picks, and those first 3 needs that we just mentioned there are very good groups in this draft class. So when I look at free agency, I would start at safety. It obviously depends if you re-sign one or both of those safeties, but there's some really big-name safeties that I do believe will be hitting the market and would be awesome fits here for the Eagles. So those 4 players would be Justin Reed from the Houston Texans, Tyrann Mathieu, Marcus May from the New York Jets, and Tracy Walker. I do think at least 3 of those 4 will be on the open market, and hell, that'd be an upgrade. At least those first 3. I don't know if Tracy Walker is for sure an upgrade over McLeod and Anthony Harris, but would be a good fit nonetheless. And then, the other positions I mentioned, it's a good group in the draft there. So I don't think you need to get desperate in free agency at attacking those spots, but you can still pursue it. There is one player that I think is a unique fit here, and that's Allen Robinson, because he has those Pennsylvania ties. I think you could afford him in theory for, a front-loaded contract that's about $10 million against your cap that gets more expensive as time goes on. It could be a unique situation where Philly appeals to Allen Robinson. Him, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert. Like, that would be a really good receiving just group for Jalen Hurts or whoever it may be. So that's one big name receiver that I would target. Godwin, same kind of breath there. Godwin actually is also Penn State. I should have thought of that. So Robinson and Godwin, I would pursue them. I don't know if you're going to get outpriced by someone else, but definitely great options for them. Otherwise, I'd probably look at that kind of C-level group of wide receivers, someone that can be a third wide receiver in there, someone like Cedric Wilson, who can be a perimeter player, play a little bit in the slot, or Christian Kirk. Good athletes, separator types for Jalen Hurts, playmaker types with the ball in their hands, but nothing that's going to cost you an arm and a leg, just kind of a Band-Aid replacement. And you can kind of look towards the draft for more of your long-term option. And then at linebacker for the Eagles, one player that really just kind of makes sense to me is Jayon Brown. Really nice cover linebacker, could be a nice fit next to Mike Edwards. Otherwise, Rashaan Evans is a free agent. I could see the Eagles having some interest there. Probably more looking for that cover style, though, honestly, with a guy like Jayon Brown. And then on the edge, you're letting Derek Barnett go. Ryan Kerrigan is on the way out. You got Brandon Graham coming back from a serious injury, up there in age. I think it'd be smart to leverage some kind of a cheap veteran starting caliber player just to ensure some pass rush production from that edge group. Philly has always loved to just be deep on the D-line, and right now that edge group is running thin. So just a few veteran, cheaper option names that come to mind: Jerry Hughes, Jason Pierre-Paul, Mario Addison, and Justin Houston, I think would be likely fits here for the Eagles. And then you, of course, look ahead to the draft. We've alluded to it. They have those 3 first-round picks, and I think you attack those positions of need: wide receiver, linebacker, edge, and maybe safety, depending on what you do in free agency there. I think the safeties in free agency are going to be the most valuable group for this team. But I think a wide receiver would make a lot of sense. Is that a Garrett Wilson out of Ohio State? Treylon Burks, who didn't have the best combine, and I'm glad I'm kind of letting the combine breathe a little bit, by the way, because these workout grades are all over the place right now. The 40 times was just crazy, how high they were coming in, and then they're still lowering a lot of these 40 times. So gonna let the combine breathe, and I'll talk about the combine next week for sure. But there's a big group of wide receivers you could target for Philadelphia with one of those picks. I think someone like Nakobe Dean or Devin Lloyd with one of those first-round picks. Finally invest in linebacker for this group. And then at edge, you could get a David Ojabo or a George Karlaftis with one of those first-round picks. And all of a sudden, you're filling all these needs, and this roster is complete other than quarterback. And that does make you think about the quarterback question here, because you have those 3 first-round picks, and you kind of, I don't want to say you stumbled into him, because I respect what Howie Roseman did to acquire these first round picks, but Miami kind of gave you this pick, and then you get the one from Indianapolis that could have been a 2. It's not a bad spot to gamble on one of these quarterbacks with upside. And I do think one of the 3 will be there. So I definitely would not fault them if they're sitting there maybe with any of these first round picks and they take, I don't think Malik Willis will be there at this point. I think that hype train has left the station. I wouldn't trade up for Malik Willis. But if you got Matt Corral or Sam Howell sitting there at like 19, I could understand the thinking of like, look, it's just one of our 3 firsts. Let's roll the dice, and he can sit for a year behind Jalen Hurts, who's still learning, and you now have 2 dart throws with Jalen Hurts and Sam Howell or Corral or whoever it may be. I could definitely get behind that thought process. So just something to think about for the Eagles as you look forward, because I like Hurts' development, but I still just don't feel like he is the surefire future. And you're going to have to pay him soon. He's coming up on his 3rd year, and he doesn't have a 5th-year option. So that's another kind of negative against Hurts at this point in time. Then we have our second to last team here, the New York Giants. I do want to take a second to plug my second YouTube channel, that is TFG Plays. I'm currently doing and producing a Giants realistic rebuild, so Giants fans, check that out. The link is in the description below, or just search TFG Plays or Giants Rebuild. You will find it. That is a Madden 22 content right there, so go check that out. But anyway, the New York Giants have a very straightforward offseason ahead of them. They're currently on over the salary cap at $5.5 million. That's the 26th least amount of cap space. And they have a very short list of impending free agents. They kind of are what they are for the most part. There is something I need to talk about, and that is the Saquon Barkley trade rumors. So Saquon Barkley has a fully guaranteed salary, which means if they were to trade him, the team that gets him acquires that salary. So they would clear over $7 million in cap space by trading Saquon Barkley. You wouldn't have to kick any of these contracts down the road to get over the salary cap. I want to be, as much as anybody, the guy that says, you got to keep Saquon Barkley because he's that good. And, you just got to give him better blocking and he'll break out. I'm as big of a Saquon Barkley truther as you'll find. I've gone years saying he's quietly the best running back in the NFL. He just has this garbage situation around him. But I do think we've seen a drop-off from Saquon. I think he still has incredible explosiveness, but it's not like it was coming out of Penn State. He's been banged up. He's been rid into the ground here. And I also think he's just lost so much vision and confidence as a runner that he's not a superstar running back. He really isn't. Like, is he a top 20 running back in the NFL? Unfortunately, I have to say I don't know. So if there's a team that wants to gamble on that upside and you can get maybe a late second or an early 3rd round pick for Saquon Barkley, and you would get over the salary cap just by making that move, and you're going to have to pay Saquon soon, by the way, who's going to leverage the fact that you spent the 3rd overall pick on him against you and make you pay him $15 million. Look, if a team like New England or somebody else is willing to roll the dice on Saquon Barkley, I think you have to strongly think about it. I don't know for sure what my answer is. I still believe in Saquon Barkley, but it has reached a point where I think it's something the Giants should heavily consider, which is just so unfortunate. But that they've let it get to this point. But either way, they'll be able to get over the cap, whether they trade Barkley or restructure Galladay or something. You can restructure enough to get clear $5.5 million of cap space. That's nothing. But they do have a list of impending free agents here. Evan Ingram, tight end, former 1st round pick. Nate Solder, Giants fans excited to say goodbye to him. Will Hernandez, who has just regressed since he got in the league for the Giants. Nose tackle Austin Johnson, good rotational front man for them. And then safety Jabril Peppers as well. Another, I guess he wasn't a 1st round pick. They got him for the Odell Beckham trade. But yeah, it's a small list. I think if you let all these guys go, you're not really going to miss any of them all that much. The one guy I would talk to is Evan Ingram. I think the plan here is to have a better passing offense, both in structure with the offensive line and also by play design with Brian Daboll. Now, Daboll's never like overutilized tight ends. I don't think he's going to super prioritize Evan Ingram, but I would like to see what Evan Ingram would look like in a new regime that is recommitted to the passing game. If you can get Evan Ingram on a one-year prove-it deal for like $6 million, I think you do it. I think you want to surround Daniel Jones with as much possible talent as you can. But again, you're not swimming in cap space here. And he's not a great player. He's incredibly inconsistent. So could be a situation where you end up having to let him go or test the market and someone outbids you. But I would certainly talk to Evan Ingram and try to get him in for cheap. And then the other, I'd let everyone else go. Those are pretty easy decisions. But the one guy that is controversial there would be Jabril Peppers, who had a really good 2020 season under Patrick Graham. But that was a scheme thing. Patrick Graham totally utilized 3 safeties. Jabril Peppers had found the perfect role as that bandit safety who played a lot of linebacker. And with Wink Martindale coming in, they're going to be in a lot more too high safeties. And the role that Jabril Peppers would be playing would be asking him to play potentially press man coverage and cover zero and a lot more man coverage on slot receivers and stuff, as opposed to more of those lurking zones where he can focus on run defense and keeping his eyes on the quarterback a little more, where I think he's much better. I think Jabril Peppers could be good for Wink Martindale, but I think it's a skill set that he hasn't proven. And I think you let him go. It's unfortunate, but you're paying Logan Ryan a ton of money. You have Xavier McKinney. You have 2 safeties there. So I think you just kind of have to bite the bullet and let Jabril Peppers go, in which case I would love to see Jabril go to Las Vegas and reunite with Patrick Graham. So some tough calls there to make as you look ahead to free agency. Again, you really don't have a lot of money at all, but I think you could try and sneak in with these agents of all these offensive linemen and try to find value. See who's sneaking through the cracks. There's usually 1 or 2 guys that just, for whatever reason, they don't get signed. They're sitting there after a couple weeks, and maybe you can slide in there. So just a list of guys that could potentially be those types of players. Cornelius Lucas from Washington, Riley Reif from Cincinnati, Joseph Noteboom, Mark Glowinski of the Colts, Andrew Norwell, Matt Paradise, Lucas Patrick, Ted Karras. These are all kind of potential budget offensive lineman targets for them in free agency, because again, they don't have a lot of money, but if they can find a little value, you gotta capitalize that and fix that offensive line whenever and wherever you can. And then we look ahead to the draft, where obviously offensive line is going to be your premium focus there. This O-line needs to be fixed, and it's not easy to do in the draft, but when you have 2 top 7 picks, it definitely makes things easier. So I do think you're looking at very likely spending one of those 2 picks on one of those top 3 tackles. There is a clear-cut premium with those top 3 guys. That is Charles Cross, Ikem Ekwonu, and Evan Neal. Neal likely won't be there for them, so Ekwonu and or Charles Cross. I think you're very likely spending either the 5th or the 7th round, or the 5th or the 7th pick on one of those guys, if not both. I could totally get behind taking Charles Cross and putting him at right tackle and Ikem Ekwonu and putting him at left guard and treating that like, your big budget free agent signings. I don't think that's a bad strategy at all. There's other options later in the draft, but you are looking at a pretty big drop off. Another guy I'm super high on is Zion Johnson. You're not going to spend the 7th overall pick on him, but I love Zion Johnson, man. Yeah, it's going to be O-line heavy in the draft. I do think they really want an edge rusher as well, though. So if they're sitting there at 5 and like Thibodeau's there, I could definitely see them pulling the trigger there. He fits that kind of pocket pushing ability type that Wink Martindale has always valued. So I do think that would be something they'd think about. Otherwise, you're probably looking at edge in the 2nd round. Maybe a Jermaine Johnson sneaks out of the 1st. Maybe it's Ebiketie, who I could see some Yannick Ngakoue comparisons, who Wink liked in Baltimore. So, yeah, there's your focus is really O-line, edge, and potentially a linebacker like in the second round. You can't spend a first rounder on a linebacker. Their line play just needs too much work. But maybe like Christian Harris in the second round could be a fit for the Giants. And then we have the Washington football team to wrap this thing up. It's a very good roster, man. This team that had expectations last year. Fitzpatrick goes down right away, and things just kind of spiraled out of control after that. The defense wasn't as good as you expected. Those edge rushers getting injured. It was just a rough year, but they still have expectations next year to compete in this division. They got to figure out this quarterback mess, though, because Taylor Heinicke's fun. He's exciting. It's going to get you 4 or 5 weeks every year where you're like, dang, I can get behind Taylor Heinicke. He won us that game. But pretty much every other week, he's not going to be that guy. So you would not feel good heading into the year with Heinicke as your starter. You like to have him on the team because, if everything goes perfect here, you could get that big Case Keenum season for the Vikings in 2017, and maybe they are a playoff team. But you'd rather reduce that margin for error and get a better quarterback. So I think before free agency even starts, they've got to be having conversations internally about trading for a guy. Now, the elite guys aren't an option here for Washington at all. Aaron Rodgers is going back to Green Bay. I don't think the Seahawks have any intent to trade Russell Wilson. And let's be honest, the Washington football team or the Washington Commanders cannot trade for Deshaun Watson. This is a team that has mistreated women. They've been in the headlines for the wrong reasons for a long time. And if this team traded for Deshaun Watson, it would be just a public relations nightmare for Dan Snyder and the entire organization. So I don't think that's a move that's available to Washington. So you're looking at Jimmy G, definitely would be a good candidate. I think Washington and Pittsburgh are the ideal landing spots for Jimmy Garoppolo, and I think Washington could be a playoff team with Jimmy G. I look at Carson Wentz. I think you have to think about it. I think Indy's a little ahead of themselves just selling Carson Wentz for cheap. I'm not like advocating that Carson Wentz is the future or anything, but he's a starting caliber guy. He was mostly solid last year outside of like 3 games where he just embarrassed himself. But Carson Wentz is better than pretty much anything else you can do here. I think if you can give a 3rd or 4th round pick to Indianapolis for Carson Wentz, I think you probably do that, depending on what other players are available to you. Another guy that I think you got to discuss internally is Jordan Love. I don't know where they stand on Jordan Love. There's a lot of Jordan Love haters out there. I'm not one of them. I still think he's got a lot of promise. He's spent 2 years in development. I think he's a clear-cut best quarterback in this draft class if you were treating him as a rookie. He is only 23 years old, which is younger than Malik Willis. It's younger than Kenny Pickett. It's younger than a lot of the guys in this class. So I still think Jordan Love, if you can send the 43rd pick for Jordan Love, I think that's a no-brainer for Washington in my mind, because you have a pretty damn good surrounding situation. You get 3 cheap years from Jordan Love. That's about as easy of an answer to the quarterback situation as you could find. But again, I'm much higher on Jordan Love than seemingly most people. So I think that's something they should do, but I don't think they will. So yeah, you probably are trading for one of these guys, whether it's Jimmy G, Carson Wentz, or Jordan Love. And then you're sitting there with decent amount of cap space. Maybe you can move some money around. And a very short list of impending free agents. This team's pretty much coming back other than Brandon Sheriff. And I look at that and I'm like, what's been the hesitation with Brandon Sheriff? Is there still bad blood because they moved him from tackle to guard and he feels like that Washington robbed Brandon Sheriff of a lot of money by doing that? I don't know. That's just speculation. But it's weird that they haven't paid Brandon Sheriff. He's one of the 5 to 7 best guards in the NFL. He's endured a lot here. He's easily deserving of top offensive lineman money. And maybe it is that he wants to be paid like a right tackle because that's what he was coming out of the draft. But pay that guy. Like, this is a really good offensive line. But if you let Brandon Sheriff go, who knows what that does to the right tackle situation, where you're probably going to be playing the kid out of Texas, who I like. at right tackle. Who knows what that does to your center? God, I'm struggling with the name recall with Washington. But their center's a good player that's kind of emerged from the shadows the last few years. If you take Brandon Sheriff out of there, does that hurt the rest of your offensive line, not just the right guard position? So pay Brandon Sheriff. What's the holdup? Does he want out of Washington that bad? Potentially he does. But God, that's a frustrating situation for Washington fans. That's a no-brainer to keep him. He's easily one of the best 3 or 4 free agents that would hit the market in this situation. And they franchise tagged him like twice now. He's probably pissed about that. So it's unfortunate that it's gotten to this point. If this is me, I'm trading for Jordan Love. I'm paying Brandon Scherf, and let's go, man. But it just doesn't feel like that's the direction that it's going to go here. All reports are Scherf's going to hit the market, and there's bad blood there. So that's unfortunate. Other than that, I mean, I'd talk to J.D. McKissic. Can you get him for really cheap? He's, Washington fans probably don't love him because he steals targets from Antonio Gibson. Antonio Gibson's a really explosive, fun player, but he doesn't do the nitty-gritty, easy stuff that J.D. McKissic does so well, and he's a good playmaker for them. So I would not just let him go necessarily. I would talk to J.D. McKissic. If nothing else, he's a good third down back and a good backup to Antonio Gibson. So as we head to free agency, let's pretend they didn't trade for a quarterback just to kind of play out all the scenarios. Because if they do, that's pretty much what you're looking at. You bring in Wentz or you bring in Garoppolo, you're not going to have a ton of money to hand out here. But if you don't, I think there's still options in free agency that could potentially work here. Marcus Mariota, Jameis Winston, Andy Dalton, Teddy Bridgewater. None of those are exciting, but those are all probably 3 better quarterbacks than Taylor Heineke. Other than Mariota, I'm not entirely sure if he's better than Heineke, but all these guys would be pretty cheap. Decent veteran options to roll the dice on. There is one spot, because if you are not spending on a quarterback and you're not spending on Brandon Sheriff, spend on one of these safeties, man. I really look at this group. I talked about it with the Eagles. I look at this group with Tyrann Mathieu. There's no way Jesse Bates hits the market, so I don't bring him up. But Tyrann Mathieu, Justin Reed, Marcus Williams, Marcus May. These are like star safeties that are young, other than Mathieu. But they're guys you can give a 3-4 year contract to, give them top dollar on the market, and they're going to play. They're going to return that back. Sometimes you have to pay a B-level player, A money, for example. And, well, these aren't all A players, but I think Justin Reed can be. I think Marcus Williams and Tyrann Mathieu are A players. And I think Marcus May wouldn't demand like $20 million or whatever. I think you can pay him B money. So those are 4 players that I would target. It's just a position that's not a strength for Washington. You have Landon Collins, who's kind of that bandit type. You have Cam Curl, who's a good player, but he's a complimentary player. He's not a star safety with a ton of range and versatility. He is a versatile guy, but he's just not a super rangy cover guy like those players we just mentioned. So that safety group would be somewhere I'd really target. And then after safety, I'd love to see them round out this secondary with a good slot corner. You could find a cheap one, someone like Desmond King, K'Wan Williams, reunite the Fuller brothers, go Kyle and Kendall Fuller, could be a ton of fun here. Kyle's never played true slot, but I think he could handle it. Chris Harris from the Chargers, could he come in here to a zone-heavy system and have another good year or two potentially? So that would be a group that I think they could round out their secondary in. And then you look ahead to the draft, and again, this all just depends on what you've done at quarterback. If you traded for Jordan Love, which again I don't think happens, you're not drafting a quarterback here. That's obvious. If you went any of the other routes, you're probably honestly investing that first round pick towards a quarterback. If you want my opinion on what I think happens, I think Washington is probably the most likely team to end up with Malik Willis, because the hype on him has turned into this, you got to spend like a top 10 pick to get Malik Willis. So if you're Washington, they got a complete roster. They can, if they like him enough, they can justify using the 11th pick, a couple other picks to move up to like the 7th spot or whatever to take Malik Willis. I'm not doing that, man. I've been very clear. I think the hype train on Malik Willis has gotten out of hand for no good reason. I think after I did my evals in January, I looked at Willis, I looked at Howell, and I looked at Corral, and I'm like, these guys all have a lot of issues on tape. They're all really athletic quarterbacks. They all have very strong arms. There's a marginal gap between these three players. All of them need to sit. All of them need to develop and learn under another starter. All of them need proper support by a good organization with good receivers and blocking. Why is Malik Willis all of a sudden skyrocket above these two? It doesn't make sense to me, especially when you're talking about spending a top 10 pick on him. So if you can leverage that hype for Malik Willis, trade down. Pittsburgh, sure, you can take the chance on Malik Willis. We'll punt this thing. We'll get some extra picks from you, and we'll go with Sam Howell, reunite him with Diami Brown, or we'll go with Matt Corral and give him a real NFL offense, unlike what he had at Ole Miss. There's going to be people that disagree with that. There's going to be people that see a ton of logic in that. It all just depends on how you view these quarterbacks. But in my own opinion, the gap between Willis, Howell, and Corral is like itty bitty, teeny tiny. Like Washington, in my opinion, has 3 equal-sized darts, and throwing it at Malik Willis is going to cost you more to throw that dart as opposed to Sam Howell or Matt Corral. So I disagree that the upside on Willis is so much better than Howell and Corral. They all can run. They all have strong arms, and they all have a lot of issues. So that's where I'm at. I think they probably do end up with Malik Willis in real life. They're probably the odds-on favorite to get him or whatever. But that wouldn't necessarily be my process. Now, if you stay put at 11 and you take Malik Willis, I get it. I don't hate Malik Willis. I'm just a little bit lower on him than some people. But that's probably where that pick goes, unless they trade for Jordan Love as the one guy that's viewed as a future type of quarterback, whereas everyone else is a Band-Aid. But if you don't go quarterback, let's say something happens, they trade for Love, they end up with Russell somehow, or they get Deshaun Watson or something like that, you're pretty flexible. You can just kind of take best player available or draft for need. It's a little bit early for them to take a tight end or Daxton Hill, who I think would be great fits for them. But those are just some prospects maybe as you look at a trade down scenario or the second round. It's a good tight end group. I think Logan Thomas is solid, but he's older, and you could get a more long-term option there. So, I'm not really ready to give up on Diami Brown and draft a wide receiver in the first round. It wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Go get Chris Olave and reunite him with Terry McLaurin or Garrett Wilson or something like that. I don't think it'd be a bad decision, but I don't think you need to do that. And there is your NFC East. Fixing your teams. Stay civil in the comments, NFC East fans. Thank you for watching. We're going to have the AFC East next as we continue to grind out this series. Appreciate y'all for watching, and we'll see you later. Peace.